My son's fiancé called me a fat pig at their engagement party. What she found out 3 days later destroyed everything she thought she knew about power, money, and the quiet woman she'd chosen to humiliate. But first, let me take you back to where this nightmare began. 6 months before Madison Sterling learned the difference between assumptions and reality. I'm Dorothy Winchester, but everyone calls me Dot. At 64, I've mastered the art of being exactly what people expect to see. My double-wide trailer sits in Meadowbrook Mobile Home Community, where rent runs $400 a month and neighbors keep their business to themselves. The beige aluminum siding could use fresh paint, and my 2018 Ford pickup has seen better decades, but everything works. Most folks see a widow making do on Social Security and whatever modest savings her late husband Earl left behind. Simple clothes from discount stores, careful grocery shopping, and the quiet dignity that comes from stretching every dollar until it screams. Earl passed 3 years ago after 42 years of marriage. Heart attack at 68, quick and merciful like he would have wanted. Left me the house paid off, a small savings account, and memories of a good man who believed in helping others when you could. What people don't see is the manila folder I keep locked in my bedroom closet. The folder that contains documents Earl made me promise to keep private until the time was right. The time hasn't been right yet, but Madison Sterling is about to change that. Last Thursday afternoon, Tommy burst through my front door with news that made my heart sing and worry at the same time. "Mom, we're engaged." He grabbed Madison's hand, showing off a diamond ring that caught the light like a star. Madison said yes. Madison Sterling, 28 years old, sharp as a blade, works in financial planning for wealthy families in the city. She carries herself like someone who's never doubted her place in the world. "Congratulations, sweetheart," I said, hugging them both. "When's the wedding?" "We want to have the engagement party here first," Tommy said, his excitement lighting up the room. "Madison thinks it would be meaningful to celebrate where I grew up." Madison's smile was perfect, but something in her eyes reminded me of a cat watching a mouse hole. "It'll be so authentic," she said, like stepping back in time to simpler days. The way she said simpler made me think she didn't mean it as a compliment. "That sounds lovely, dear. How many people?" "About 60. Nothing fancy, just family and close friends." Madison glanced around my modest living room. "Tommy says you're very resourceful, so I'm sure you'll manage something appropriate." Appropriate. The word hung in the air like smoke. "I'll take care of everything," I promised. What I didn't mention was that I'd already started making phone calls. Quiet calls to people who knew how to arrange things without asking too many questions about who was paying. Saturday morning brought perfect autumn weather and enough nervous energy to power the whole trailer park. I'd spent the week coordinating details that somehow managed to arrange themselves. The community center had been professionally cleaned overnight. The industrial kitchen suddenly had upgraded equipment. Local restaurants had mysteriously donated enough food to feed a small army. Madison arrived 2 hours early with her parents, Richard and Patricia Sterling. Their black Mercedes looked like a spaceship that had landed in our gravel parking lot. "Dorothy, this is charming," Patricia said, her voice carrying the kind of charity that comes with conditions attached. "Very authentic." Richard Sterling surveyed the community center like he was calculating property values. "Tommy's lucky to have such a practical mother." Practical. Another word that wasn't quite a compliment. Madison moved through the space making small adjustments, repositioning flowers that had appeared from nowhere, sampling food that tasted like it came from expensive caterers. "Mom," she said to Patricia, loud enough for me to hear, "it's amazing what people can accomplish with limited resources and determination." But her eyes kept drifting to details that didn't quite make sense. Professional-grade sound equipment, imported wine, arrangements that suggested coordination beyond what someone on a fixed income should manage. I watched her watching and wondered what conclusions she was drawing. The party was in full swing when Madison decided to introduce me to her parents officially. She waited until we had an audience. Neighbors, Tommy's friends, family members all within earshot. "Mom, Dad, I want you to meet Tommy's mother properly." Madison's voice carried across the room with perfect clarity. "This is Dorothy Winchester." She paused, letting her parents take in my simple blue dress and modest jewelry. "I know the circumstances aren't what we're used to, but don't worry about her situation." Madison's voice dropped to what she thought was a discreet whisper, but carried clearly across the room. "Look at her, a fat pig at her age, living in a trailer park. Tommy, this is genuinely embarrassing for our family." The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Fat pig. In 42 years of marriage, Earl had never spoken to me with such cruelty. No one had ever reduced me to my physical appearance in such a calculated, devastating way. I felt heat flood my face, then drain away completely, leaving me cold and hollow. But underneath the humiliation, something else stirred. Something precise and surgical that I hadn't felt in 3 years. The same feeling I'd had when I first opened Earl's secret folder and realized what he'd been building without telling me. The silence that followed was absolute. Tommy's face went white as paper, his hands clenching into fists. Several neighbors suddenly found their punch glasses fascinating, while others stared at Madison with open shock. Even Patricia Sterling looked uncomfortable with her daughter's cruelty. But Madison wasn't finished. "Tommy and I are planning to help her once we're married, get her moved somewhere more appropriate for family. Maybe a nice assisted living facility where she belongs." Fat pig. Embarrassing for our family. Where she belongs. I felt something cold and precise settle in my chest, the same feeling I'd had 3 years ago when I first opened Earl's secret folder and realized what he'd been hiding from me. "That's very thoughtful of you both," I said quietly. What Madison Sterling didn't know was that the woman she'd just humiliated in front of 60 people had been making decisions that affected 300 families for the past 3 years. What she really didn't know was that tomorrow morning, I'd get a phone call that would force me to choose between my son's happiness and my life's work. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, let me tell you about what happened when Tommy walked me home that night. Tommy walked me home in uncomfortable silence, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. The quarter-mile between the community center and my trailer might as well have been a continent. "Mom," he finally said as we reached my front steps, "I'm sorry about what Madison said. She didn't mean it the way it sounded." I unlocked my door and gestured him inside. "Sweetheart, people say what they mean. They just don't always mean for others to hear it." She's not usually like that. She was nervous about meeting everyone, and when she gets nervous, she sometimes says things that come out wrong. I poured 2 glasses of sweet tea while Tommy paced my small kitchen like a caged animal. "Tommy, what exactly has Madison said about where I live?" He stopped pacing. "She's mentioned that she worries about your financial situation, whether you can afford proper health care, whether you're safe living alone out here." "And what did you tell her about my finances?" "The truth. That Dad left you comfortable, but not wealthy. That you manage fine on Social Security and his pension, but you're careful with money. The truth. Except Tommy didn't know what the truth actually was. Has she asked specific questions about Dad's work? About what he left behind?" Tommy's hesitation told me everything. She asked about his patents once, whether they generated any ongoing income. My heart skipped a beat. "What did you tell her?" "That Dad had some technical patents, but nothing that made serious money." "That's right, isn't it?" I looked at my son. This honest, hard-working man who'd never known his father had been hiding financial resources that could change everything. "Yes, sweetheart, that's what I've always told you." But as the words left my mouth, I wondered how long I could keep telling that particular version of the truth. Monday morning brought rain and a phone call that turned my blood to ice water. "Miss Winchester, this is Janet Morrison from First National Bank." Her voice carried professional concern that made my hands shake. "I'm calling about some unusual inquiries regarding your accounts." I gripped the phone tighter. "What kind of inquiries?" "Someone claiming to represent family interests has been requesting detailed financial information about your banking relationships. They've contacted 3 different institutions where you have accounts." The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "They're asking about transaction patterns, deposit sources, and withdrawal destinations. Very detailed questions that suggest they're building a comprehensive financial profile." "Who is it?" "I can't provide specific names over the phone, but I can tell you they presented professional credentials and claim to be conducting financial planning research for elderly family members." Professional credentials, financial planning. Madison. "What information did you provide?" "Nothing beyond what's required by law. But Miss Winchester, they knew enough about your accounts to ask very specific questions. This isn't random. Someone with access to your personal information is conducting a systematic investigation." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the rain beating against my windows. 3 years of careful privacy, 3 years of keeping Earl's secrets safe, and now someone was systematically unraveling everything. But what terrified me more than the invasion of privacy was what Madison might discover, and what she might do with that information. That afternoon, I drove to town and parked across from Sterling Financial Planning, a glass office building that screamed expensive expertise. Through the windows, I could see Madison at her desk, surrounded by documents and multiple computer screens. She wasn't just casually curious about my finances. She was conducting a professional investigation. My phone buzzed with a text from Tommy. "Madison wants to take you out for coffee tomorrow. She feels bad about Saturday and wants to get to know you better." Get to know me better, after spending 2 days investigating my financial history. I typed back, "That sounds lovely." But there was nothing lovely about the feeling that settled in my stomach like cold lead. Through the coffee shop window, I watched Madison make notes on a legal pad, occasionally glancing at documents that looked suspiciously like bank statements. She was building a case. But a case for what? Tuesday afternoon, Madison chose a coffee shop in the expensive part of town, the kind of place where a simple latte costs more than I usually spend on groceries in a day. "Dorothy, thank you so much for meeting me," she said, standing to hug me like we were old friends. "I wanted to apologize for Saturday night. I didn't express myself well." She gestured to a corner table where she'd already arranged papers and her laptop. "I also wanted to talk to you about something important." We ordered coffee. She paid, insisting it was the least she could do, and settled at her carefully chosen table. "Dorothy, I've been thinking about your situation, and I'm concerned." "What situation is that, dear?" Madison opened a folder containing documents I didn't recognize. "As someone who works in financial planning, I've noticed some patterns that worry me." She spread papers across the table. Bank statements, transaction records, deposit histories, all bearing my name and account numbers. "Madison, where did you get these?" "I requested them as part of a family financial assessment. Since Tommy and I are getting married, it's important for me to understand our extended family's financial health." The audacity was breathtaking. She'd conducted financial surveillance on me and was presenting it as family concern. "These records show some troubling patterns," she continued, pointing to highlighted sections. "You're making regular large payments to various organizations. Payments that don't align with your reported income sources." I stared at the numbers on the page. $43,000 to food banks last month, $37,000 to community organizations the month before. "Dorothy, I'm worried that you're being systematically exploited by charity scammers." Madison's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to managing other people's financial crises. "These payment patterns are classic indicators of elder financial abuse. Charities identify vulnerable seniors and gradually escalate their requests until they're essentially stealing everything." She pulled out more documents. look at this progression. Small donations initially, then larger amounts, then regular monthly transfers that have increased consistently over 3 years. The papers showed everything. Every donation, every transfer, every penny I'd moved through the careful network I'd spent 3 years building. Dorothy, you've given away over $800,000 in the past 18 months alone. $800,000. Seeing it written down in black and white made my chest tight. Madison, those donations were voluntary. I help local charities because I believe in their work. That's exactly what every victim says. Her voice carried the patronizing tone of someone explaining basic concepts to a confused child. Financial predators are sophisticated. They build emotional relationships with their targets to lower their defenses. She leaned forward, her expression mixing professional concern with personal conviction. Dorothy, on Social Security and Earl's modest pension, these donation levels are financially impossible unless you're either hiding significant assets from your family or being systematically defrauded. The choice she was offering was elegant in its simplicity. Admit to hiding money from Tommy, or accept that I was too confused to manage my own affairs. I need to think about this, I said quietly. Of course. But Dorothy, thinking time is also time for these organizations to continue exploiting you. Every day we wait costs money you can't afford to lose. She closed the folder with the finality of someone who'd made her point. I'll give you until Friday to decide how you want to handle this. But if you won't protect yourself from financial exploitation, there are legal mechanisms to ensure your protection. Legal mechanisms. The words hung between us like a drawn knife. After Madison left, I sat alone in the expensive coffee shop, surrounded by the wreckage of my carefully guarded privacy. She'd discovered everything. The donations, the amounts, the systematic nature of what I'd been doing. What she hadn't discovered was why. But she was about to find out that threatening the wrong person's life work comes with consequences she'd never imagined. Friday evening arrived with storm clouds and a knock on my door that I'd been dreading all week. Tommy stood on my front steps with Madison beside him, both carrying the grim expressions of people about to deliver an ultimatum. "Mom, we need to talk," Tommy said. "Madison's shown me some things that have me really worried." They settled into my living room while I made coffee with hands that trembled, despite my best efforts to stay calm. When I returned, Madison had spread documents across my coffee table like evidence at a trial. "Dorothy, I've had 3 days to analyze your financial patterns," Madison began, her voice carrying professional authority. "The situation is worse than I initially thought." She pointed to highlighted spreadsheets. "These aren't random charitable donations. This is systematic financial exploitation on a massive scale." Tommy picked up one of the documents, his face pale as he read the numbers. "Mom, this says you gave away $47,000 last month alone. That's more than I make in a year." "It's more than anyone makes on Social Security," Madison added. "Dorothy, these payment levels are mathematically impossible unless you're either hiding significant income sources from your family or being systematically defrauded by multiple organizations." The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing inward. "The organizations you're supporting show classic signs of charity fraud," Madison continued. "Minimal public information, no clear documentation of how donations are used, emotional manipulation to increase giving amounts over time." She turned to Tommy. "Your mother is the perfect target. Recently widowed, isolated, financially naive, and trusting to a fault." The casual cruelty of the assessment hit me like a physical blow. "Madison, that's my mother you're talking about," Tommy said quietly. "And that's exactly why we need to act. Family loyalty doesn't protect people from financial predators." Madison pulled out a thick document from her briefcase. "I've prepared a comprehensive protection plan that will safeguard Dorothy's financial future while allowing for reasonable charitable giving within her actual means." The papers were professionally bound, titled Winchester Family Financial Security Framework. This establishes shared oversight of all financial decisions exceeding $500. Tommy and I would review all charitable donations to ensure they're legitimate and appropriate. Tommy studied the document. Madison, this looks like you want to control my mother's money. I want to protect your mother's money. There's a difference. She turned to me with the practiced smile of someone delivering unwelcome news. Dorothy, this plan ensures you can continue helping legitimate charities while preventing exploitation by fraudulent organizations. What if I don't agree to this plan? Madison's smile never wavered, but something cold moved behind her eyes. Then I'll have no choice but to pursue legal intervention. Elder financial abuse is a serious crime, and when family members won't act to protect vulnerable seniors, the courts will. Adult protective services, conservatorship proceedings, mental competency evaluations. She didn't say the words, but they hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Madison, Tommy's voice carried a warning tone. You're talking about taking legal action against my mother. I'm talking about protecting both of you. If this financial exploitation continues, there won't be anything left for Dorothy's care when she needs it. There won't be anything left for your children's future. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. Tommy, your mother has given away enough money in 3 years to secure your entire family's financial future. Instead, she's being systematically robbed by people who see her as nothing more than a source of income. The silence that followed stretched until it became unbearable. Tommy sat with his head in his hands, processing information that was reshaping his understanding of everything. Mom, he finally said, tell me the truth. Are these people taking advantage of you? I looked at my son, this good man who'd worked 60-hour weeks to build his own life, who'd never asked for financial help, who believed in earning what you needed through honest labor. No, sweetheart, I'm not being taken advantage of. Then where is this money coming from? His voice cracked with the pain of someone discovering his world wasn't what he'd believed. Madison showed me Social Security statements, pension records, Dad's life insurance payouts. The numbers don't add up. Madison nodded approvingly. Exactly. The donations exceed reported income by hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. She turned to me with the expression of someone delivering a medical diagnosis. Dorothy, either you have undisclosed income sources that you've hidden from your family, or you're being systematically defrauded. There isn't a third option. But there was a third option. One that Madison Sterling couldn't conceive because she'd made assumptions about my competence based on where I lived and how I dressed. I need time to think about this, I said. Time to think is time for these predators to continue stealing from you, Madison replied. Every day we delay costs money that can't be recovered. Tommy stood up, his decision written across his face. Mom, I love you, but if you won't protect yourself, then Madison and I have to protect you. The betrayal in his voice cut deeper than any blade. You have until Monday morning to agree to the oversight plan voluntarily, Madison said, closing her briefcase with the finality of someone who'd made her point. After that, I file the necessary legal documentation to ensure your protection. After they left, I sat alone in my living room staring at the protection plan that would strip away everything I'd spent 3 years building. But what terrified me more than losing control of my finances was the thought of what would happen to the 300 families who depended on programs I funded. My phone rang. It was Janet Morrison from the bank. Miss Winchester, I'm calling because the inquiries about your accounts have escalated. Someone filed a formal complaint with the County Financial Crimes Unit alleging elder financial abuse. The words hit me like ice water. They're claiming you're being systematically defrauded by multiple charitable organizations. The complaint includes detailed financial documentation and requests immediate investigation. I closed my eyes, feeling the careful world I'd built crumbling around me. What happens now? Detective Sarah Chen will be contacting you next week to schedule an interview. Miss Winchester, this is serious. If law enforcement determines you're being exploited, they can freeze your accounts as evidence. Freeze my accounts? While 300 families waited for food assistance that wouldn't come, while 17 different programs depending on my funding collapsed overnight. Is there anything else you can tell me about who filed the complaint? Only that it was filed by someone claiming to be a concerned family member with professional expertise in financial crimes identification. After I hung up, I walked to my bedroom and pulled out the manila folder I'd kept locked away for 3 years. Earl's final secret, the one he'd made me promise to keep until the time was right. Inside were documents that would change everything. Patent agreements, royalty statements, investment portfolios, legal structures I'd spent 3 years learning to manage. And at the bottom, a letter Earl had written before he died. Dorothy, if you're reading this, then someone has threatened the work we've chosen to do quietly. The choice is yours now. Stay hidden and let them win, or show them what real power looks like. I stared at Earl's handwriting, thinking about Madison Sterling's assumptions, Tommy's betrayal, and the 300 families whose welfare hung in the balance. The time for hiding was over, but Madison Sterling had no idea what she'd just awakened. Monday morning brought Detective Sarah Chen to my front door at 8 o'clock sharp. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of professional competence that comes from years of dealing with people's worst decisions. Miss Winchester, I'm here about the financial exploitation complaint filed on your behalf. I understand you may be the victim of systematic charity fraud. I invited her in, my hands steadier than they'd been in days. Something about her directness was almost comforting compared to Madison's manipulative concern. Detective, before we begin, I need to ask you something. Exactly what information were you provided? She consulted her notes. A detailed financial analysis showing donation patterns consistent with systematic elder abuse. Documentation of payments totaling over $1.2 million in 36 months to organizations with questionable legitimacy. $1.2 million. Madison had been thorough. The complainant provided evidence that your reported income sources make these donation levels mathematically impossible, suggesting either unreported income or exploitation by predatory charities. Detective Chen's eyes were kind but sharp. Miss Winchester, in my experience, victims of financial exploitation often don't realize they're being manipulated. These people are very good at making you believe the giving is your idea. I poured coffee while considering how much truth I could share without revealing everything. Detective, what would happen if I told you the donations were entirely voluntary and that I have undisclosed resources that make them financially sustainable? She paused, coffee cup halfway to her lips. I'd ask you to provide documentation proving the legitimacy of those resources and explaining why they weren't disclosed to family members. And if I couldn't provide that documentation immediately? Then I'd have to consider the possibility that you're either hiding assets to avoid family responsibility or being coached by the people exploiting you to claim the donations are voluntary. The trap was elegant. Admit to hiding money and face family consequences, or maintain innocence and face criminal investigation. But there was a third option Detective Chen couldn't imagine. Detective, how long do I have to provide that documentation? Given the amounts involved, I'd need comprehensive financial records within 72 hours. 72 hours. The same timeline I'd given Madison Sterling in my opening hook. Time to show everyone exactly who they'd chosen to threaten. After Detective Chen left, I made the first phone call I'd hoped never to make. Marcus Webb Law Office, this is Sarah. Sarah, this is Dorothy Winchester. I need to speak with Marcus immediately about activating the emergency protocols we discussed 3 years ago. 20 minutes later, I sat in Marcus Webb's conference room, looking at documents I'd helped create but hoped never to use. Dorothy, are you certain about this? Once we activate these protocols, your anonymity is gone forever. Marcus had been Earl's patent attorney and the only person who knew the full scope of what we'd built after Earl's death. Madison Sterling has forced my hand. She's triggered a criminal investigation and threatened to destroy programs that serve 300 families. What's your timeline? Detective Chen needs comprehensive financial documentation within 72 hours. Madison expects my surrender by Friday. I need to move faster than both of them. Marcus opened a secure filing cabinet and removed documents we'd prepared 3 years ago, but never filed. The Rural Family Support Foundation disclosure documents, complete financial transparency reports, and professional background verification. Everything needed to prove legitimacy. I stared at papers that would transform me from anonymous donor to public figure overnight. Marcus, there's something else. I want to offer Madison Sterling a choice. What kind of choice? The same choice everyone gets when they threaten something I've spent years building. Learn from their mistake or face the consequences. Marcus had known me long enough to recognize the tone in my voice. Dorothy, what are you planning? I'm planning to show a financial planning professional what real wealth management looks like. That afternoon, I sat in my car outside Sterling Financial Planning, watching Madison through the office windows. She was animated on a phone call, gesturing at documents spread across her desk. My phone buzzed with a text from Tommy. Mom, please tell me you're going to accept Madison's help. I can't watch you get hurt by these people anymore. These people, as if I were some confused old woman being led around by clever predators. I typed back, I'll give you both an answer Friday. But first, I want Madison to meet with someone. Who? Someone who can verify whether her concerns about my financial decisions are legitimate. What I didn't tell Tommy was that the someone Madison would be meeting was the executive director of the largest foundation in the region. Someone who could identify amateur financial analysis from professional incompetence. Through the window, I watched Madison end her phone call and make notes on what looked like legal documents. She was preparing for Friday's confrontation with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the cards. But Madison Sterling had made the same mistake everyone made when they looked at me. She'd confused visibility with power. Wednesday evening, I received a call that changed the entire equation. Miss Winchester, this is Dr. Patricia Hernandez, Executive Director of the State Community Foundation Network. I understand you've requested consultation regarding charitable giving practices. Dr. Hernandez was someone whose opinion carried weight in every boardroom in 3 states. Dr. Hernandez, thank you for taking the time. I have a situation involving questions about my charitable giving that may require professional perspective. I've reviewed the preliminary information you provided. Miss Winchester, I have to say, the scope of coordination you've described is remarkable. Remarkable. Not concerning or questionable. Remarkable. The anonymous giving structures, the multi-organizational coordination, the impact documentation, this represents sophisticated philanthropic management. Something loosened in my chest that had been tight for days. Dr. Hernandez, someone has questioned whether these operations represent legitimate charity or systematic exploitation. A pause. Miss Winchester, may I ask what professional background enables you to coordinate operations of this complexity? The question I'd been avoiding for 3 years. I have experience in foundation management and charitable operations design. What kind of experience? Another pause while I decided how much truth to reveal. 30 years of nonprofit administration and foundation coordination. 30 years? Her voice carried surprise and something like recognition. Miss Winchester, would you be willing to meet in person? I think there may be some misunderstanding about the nature of your giving patterns. After I hung up, I realized that for the first time in days, I wasn't afraid. Madison Sterling thought she'd discovered evidence of financial exploitation. What she'd actually discovered was the work of someone with 3 decades of professional experience in exactly the field she claimed to understand. Tomorrow, she'd learn the difference between amateur analysis and professional competence. But tonight, I had one more call to make. To the person who could verify that Dorothy Winchester wasn't just some confused old woman hiding modest resources. To the person who could confirm that Dorothy Morrison Winchester had been managing multi-million-dollar charitable operations since before Madison Sterling graduated from college. The question was whether Madison was smart enough to recognize expertise when it was finally revealed, or whether she'd double down on assumptions that were about to cost her everything. Friday morning arrived with crystalline autumn air and the kind of clarity that comes from finally making an irreversible decision. I sat in my kitchen reviewing documents I'd kept hidden for 3 years, preparing to destroy my anonymity to save my life's work. At 10 o'clock, my phone rang. "Miss Winchester, this is Dr. Hernandez. I've completed my review of your charitable operations documentation. I need to ask you something directly." "Go ahead." "Are you Dorothy Morrison? The Dorothy Morrison who designed the anonymous giving protocols for the State Rural Development Foundation in the 1990s? The question I'd been avoiding for 3 years. "Yes, I am." "My God. Dorothy, you revolutionized charitable coordination across 4 states. Your work became the gold standard for anonymous philanthropy throughout the region." Something unlocked in my chest that had been clenched tight for days. "Dr. Hernandez, someone has accused me of being financially exploited by charity scammers. They're threatening legal intervention to stop my giving operations." Dorothy Morrison being exploited by charities? Her laugh was sharp with disbelief. That's like accusing Einstein of being confused by basic mathematics. They don't know about my professional background. How could they not know? "Your work is taught in nonprofit management programs across the country." "Because I've been very careful about privacy for the past 3 years. A long pause. "Dorothy, the operations you've described, the Rural Family Support Foundation, the multi-organizational coordination, the impact documentation, these represent the most sophisticated charitable network I've seen outside of major metropolitan foundations." Relief flooded through me like warm water. "Dr. Hernandez, I need professional validation of my competence and the legitimacy of my operations. Today." "Consider it done." "Dorothy, who exactly is questioning your judgment?" "A financial planner who discovered my giving patterns and concluded I was being systematically defrauded." "A financial planner presumed to analyze the work of Dorothy Morrison?" The ice in her voice could have frozen fire. This should be interesting. At 2 o'clock, Tommy and Madison arrived at my trailer with the confident expressions of people about to deliver an ultimatum to a confused elderly woman. "Mom, have you made your decision about the protection plan?" Tommy asked. "I have. But first, I want Madison to meet someone who can verify whether her analysis is accurate." Madison settled into my living room chair with professional composure. "Dorothy, I'd be happy to discuss my findings with any legitimate financial advisor." "Not a financial advisor, someone with expertise in charitable operations management." I handed Madison a business card. "Dr. Patricia Hernandez, Executive Director of the State Community Foundation Network. She's agreed to review your analysis and provide professional assessment." Madison glanced at the card, her expression shifting slightly. "Dorothy, I don't think that's necessary. My credentials speak for themselves." As do hers. Dr. Hernandez has 40 years of experience in foundation management and charitable operations oversight. Tommy looked between us. "Mom, what's going on?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. "Dr. Hernandez, right on schedule." "Miss Winchester, I have Madison Sterling on the line as well. I understand she's questioned the legitimacy of your charitable giving patterns." Madison's face went pale. "Dr. Hernandez, yes, I've identified concerning financial patterns that suggest systematic exploitation." "Miss Sterling, I've reviewed Miss Winchester's operations documentation. Before we proceed, may I ask about your experience with large-scale charitable coordination?" "I specialize in family financial planning and wealth management." "I see. And your experience with nonprofit foundation management? Madison hesitated. I have general knowledge of charitable giving tax implications. General knowledge. Dr. Hernandez's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. Miss Sterling, you've accused one of the most accomplished foundation managers in the southeastern United States of being financially exploited by charities. The silence that followed was absolute. Dr. Hernandez, Madison's voice was carefully controlled. I wasn't aware Miss Winchester had professional experience in foundation management. Miss Sterling, you weren't aware because you made assumptions about Miss Winchester's competence based on her living situation, rather than investigating her professional qualifications. Tommy stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. Mom, what professional qualifications? I walked to my filing cabinet and removed the documents I'd kept locked away for 3 years. My master's degree diploma in nonprofit administration. Professional certifications from the National Association of Charitable Gift Planners, letters of recommendation from foundation directors across 4 states. Tommy, before I married your father, I was Dorothy Morrison. I spent 30 years managing charitable foundations and designing philanthropic coordination systems. I spread the documents across my coffee table. I served as program director for the State Rural Development Foundation for 15 years, then executive director of the Appalachian Community Trust for 12 years. Madison's professional composure cracked completely. Dorothy, this level of experience suggests that I know exactly what I'm doing with my charitable giving. It suggests that the operations you've questioned represent professional expertise, not exploitation. Dr. Hernandez's voice filled the room through speakerphone. Miss Sterling, Miss Winchester designed the anonymous giving protocols that half the foundations in this region use today. The Rural Family Support Foundation isn't a scam organization. Miss Winchester created it using legal frameworks she developed professionally. Tommy's voice came out as a whisper. Mom, you never told me you had professional experience in managing foundations. You never asked about my life before I married your father. I turned to Madison, who looked like she might be physically ill. Madison Sterling, you called me a fat pig and tried to destroy my life's work. Let me introduce you to Dorothy Morrison Winchester, the woman who revolutionized charitable coordination across 4 states while you were still learning basic financial planning. You judged my worth based on my appearance and living situation. You never imagined that the fat pig you humiliated has been managing multi-million-dollar charitable operations since before you graduated from college. Madison sat in stunned silence, processing the complete reversal of everything she'd believed about the situation. Dorothy, Miss Winchester, I had no idea about your professional background. Because you investigated my financial patterns without investigating my professional qualifications. You saw an elderly woman living in a trailer park and assumed incompetence. Dr. Hernandez continued through the speaker. Miss Sterling, the operations Miss Winchester manages represent some of the most sophisticated charitable coordination I've encountered. Your analysis suggesting exploitation demonstrates fundamental misunderstanding of professional foundation management. Tommy looked between the documents and Madison's shattered composure. Madison, you filed criminal complaints against my mother without knowing she was professionally qualified to manage exactly this type of operation? I thought I was protecting her. You thought you were protecting her because you couldn't conceive that professional expertise might exist in someone who lives differently than you expected. I stood and walked to my window, looking out at the mobile home community where I'd chosen to live. Madison, I live in Meadowbrook because anonymity protects both donors and recipients from the complications that come with public recognition. The moment people know you have significant resources, charitable work becomes about status and recognition instead of actual help. But you could have told me about your background. Could I? Would you have believed that a woman living in a trailer park had 30 years of professional foundation management experience? Or would you have assumed I was lying to cover financial irresponsibility? The truth hung between us like smoke. Dr. Hernandez's voice cut through the tension. Miss Sterling, I understand you've also filed law enforcement complaints alleging financial exploitation. Madison nodded miserably. I suggest you contact Detective Chen immediately and explain that your analysis was based on incomplete information. Miss Winchester's operations are not only legitimate, they represent professional excellence in charitable coordination. After Dr. Hernandez ended the call, my living room fell into uncomfortable silence. Madison Sterling had discovered one of the most sophisticated charitable operations in the region and concluded it was evidence of elder abuse. Now she faced the consequences of assumptions that had nearly destroyed everything I'd built to help 300 families. The question was what she planned to do about it. Madison Sterling sat in my living room surrounded by evidence of professional expertise she'd never imagined existed. The confident financial planner who'd walked in to deliver ultimatums had been replaced by someone grappling with the scope of her miscalculation. Dorothy, I need to ask you something honestly, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. When I accused you of being financially exploited, did you already know this confrontation was inevitable? I considered the question carefully. Madison, I hoped it wouldn't be necessary. I've spent 3 years being very careful about privacy precisely to avoid this situation. But you were prepared for it. When you've managed multi-million-dollar foundations for 30 years, you learn to prepare for people who make assumptions about your competence. Tommy looked between us, still processing the revelation that his mother wasn't who he'd thought she was. Mom, why didn't you tell me about your professional background? About the foundation work? Because the moment family knows about significant resources or professional credentials, family dynamics change. Look what happened when Madison discovered evidence of wealth. Suddenly, my charitable giving became financial irresponsibility that threatened your future. The truth settled over the room like uncomfortable silence. Madison, I continued, you conducted unauthorized financial surveillance, filed false elder abuse claims, and threatened to destroy charitable operations serving 300 families. All because you couldn't conceive that professional expertise might exist in someone who lives differently than you expected. Her face went pale. Dorothy, I genuinely thought I was protecting you and Tommy. You thought you were protecting us because you made assumptions about my competence based on my age, living situation, and apparent income level. I stood and walked to my desk, pulling out documents I'd hoped never to use. Madison, you're a licensed financial planning professional. Your investigation methods and the false complaints you filed constitute serious ethics violations. Her hands began to shake. I also spoke with Detective Chen this morning. She was very interested to learn that the elder abuse complaint was filed by someone who conducted unauthorized financial surveillance without establishing the subject's professional qualifications. Tommy, I said gently, I think you should understand the full scope of what Madison did before you make any decisions about your relationship. I spread additional documents across the coffee table: bank records, investigation reports, legal filings. Madison accessed my financial records from 3 different institutions without authorization. She contacted law enforcement with false claims of financial exploitation. She threatened legal intervention to force control over legitimate charitable operations. Tommy stared at the evidence. Madison, is this true? I thought Dorothy was being taken advantage of. By organizations I created and manage professionally, I corrected. Madison, you called me a fat pig, then discovered the Rural Family Support Foundation and concluded it was a scam organization. You couldn't conceive that someone you'd dismissed based on appearance might actually be more competent than you. I pulled out my phone and showed them a text message from Detective Chen. Detective Chen has withdrawn the elder abuse investigation. She's now filing criminal charges against you for filing false reports and conducting unauthorized financial surveillance of a senior citizen. Madison's face went completely white. There's more. The State Foundation Network Board has been notified about a financial planner who filed false exploitation claims against a professional colleague. They're conducting an emergency review of your professional license. Tommy's voice was tight with pain. Madison, you could lose your license over this? Tommy, I was trying to protect your family's financial interests. By committing crimes against my mother? I sat back down, feeling the satisfaction of justice finally being served. Madison, 30 years ago, when I was starting my career in foundation management, someone told me that the hardest part of charitable work isn't managing money. It's managing people who think they're entitled to control what you do with it. What do you mean? I mean that you saw evidence of large-scale charitable giving, and your first instinct was to stop it. Not to investigate whether it was legitimate. Not to research my qualifications. Just to take control. I gestured toward the documents spread across my table. You called me a fat pig and tried to steal my life's work. Now you get to learn what that kind of arrogance actually costs. Madison's voice came out choked. What's going to happen to me? What happens to anyone who files false criminal reports and violates professional ethics? You'll face the legal and professional consequences of your choices. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Madison's quiet sobbing. Madison, I said without sympathy, you have earned every consequence coming your way. She looked up with tear-stained eyes. Detective Chen will be contacting you about criminal charges for filing false reports. The State Licensing Board will be scheduling a hearing about your professional misconduct. And every financial planning firm in the region will know exactly what kind of ethics violations you're capable of. Tommy stared at his fiancé in horror. Madison, you committed crimes against my mother. Tommy, please, I was trying to protect us. You were trying to control money that wasn't yours. You called my mother a fat pig and then tried to destroy her life's work when you discovered she had resources. I stood and walked to my window, looking out at the mobile home community where I'd chosen to live. Madison, you wanted to know what the fat pig was hiding. Now you know. I'm Dorothy Morrison Winchester, one of the most accomplished foundation managers in the southeastern United States. And you just destroyed your entire professional future trying to steal from me. Tommy, please tell me you understand I was trying to help. Tommy looked at her with complete disgust. Madison, I understand exactly who you are now. Someone who sees elderly people as targets for manipulation and control. He stood up and pulled the engagement ring from his pocket. This engagement is over. I can't marry someone who would commit crimes against my family. Madison's composure cracked completely. Tommy, you can't leave me now. Not when everything is falling apart. Everything is falling apart because of choices you made. You decided to investigate my mother. You decided to file false criminal complaints. You decided to try to control money that wasn't yours. I turned back to face them both. Madison Sterling, you called me a fat pig and assumed I was too stupid to fight back. You've now learned what it costs to underestimate the wrong person. What am I supposed to do now? My career is over. My relationship is over. Everything is destroyed. You're supposed to live with the consequences of treating elderly people like they're too incompetent to manage their own affairs. You're supposed to remember that actions have consequences. Tommy walked to the door. Madison, I'll have your belongings sent to your apartment. Don't contact me or my mother again. After they both left, I sat in my living room surrounded by the evidence of Madison's destruction. She'd called me a fat pig and tried to steal my life's work. Now she'd learned what that arrogance actually cost her. 3 weeks later, I sat in my kitchen reading the morning newspaper with a satisfaction I hadn't felt in months. The headline read, Local Financial Planner Faces Criminal Charges for Elder Abuse Fraud. The article detailed Madison Sterling's professional downfall with the precision she'd once applied to investigating my finances. Ms. Sterling has been charged with filing false reports, unauthorized access to financial records, and attempted financial exploitation of a senior citizen. Her professional license has been suspended pending investigation. My phone rang. It was Tommy. Mom, I saw the newspaper article. How are you feeling about everything? I'm feeling like justice was served, sweetheart. Madison made choices, and now she's facing the consequences of those choices. I still can't believe I was going to marry someone who would do that to you. Tommy, you couldn't have known. Madison showed you one face and showed me another. The important thing is that you chose correctly when you learned the truth. Do you think I was too harsh? Ending the engagement like that? I considered the question seriously. Tommy, would you want to build a life with someone who sees elderly people as targets for manipulation? Someone who files false criminal reports to get what they want? No. I guess I just feel bad that her whole life fell apart. Her life fell apart because of choices she made. You didn't create those consequences. She did. There was a long pause. Mom, can I ask you something about your foundation work? Always. Would you teach me about it? I'd like to understand what you've been doing all these years. For the first time in weeks, I smiled with genuine happiness. I'd love that, sweetheart. 6 months later, Tommy and I sat in the community center that had become the coordination hub for charitable operations across 3 counties. He'd been learning the foundation management business with the same dedication he'd brought to building his electrician practice. Mom, I got an update on Madison today. I looked up from the grant applications I was reviewing. What kind of update? She moved to another state, couldn't find work anywhere in the region after the criminal charges and license suspension. That's what happens when you build a reputation for professional misconduct. Do you ever feel bad about what happened to her? I considered the question while watching families arrive for the evening food distribution program. Tommy, Madison Sterling called me a fat pig and tried to destroy charitable operations that serve 300 families. She filed false criminal reports and violated every professional ethics standard that exists. But her whole life changed. Her whole life changed because of choices she made. I didn't force her to investigate my finances. I didn't force her to file false reports. I didn't force her to try to control money that wasn't hers. I gestured toward the families receiving assistance. Should I have let her destroy programs that keep these families fed and housed? Should I have allowed her to face no consequences for treating elderly people like they're too incompetent to manage their own affairs? Tommy watched a grandmother pick up groceries for her family. No, you're right. She earned what happened to her. Tommy, there's a difference between feeling compassion for someone's suffering and accepting responsibility for consequences they created through their own choices. What do you mean? I mean that Madison Sterling made a series of deliberate decisions to investigate, manipulate, and control. Every step of the way, she had choices. She chose arrogance over respect. She chose assumptions over investigation. She chose manipulation over honest conversation. I picked up a letter from one of the scholarship recipients. This young woman is starting medical school next month because of programs Madison tried to destroy. Should I feel worse about Madison's career destruction than I feel good about this girl's future? Tommy smiled. When you put it that way, it's pretty clear. That evening, I sat on my front porch watching sunset paint the sky over Meadowbrook Mobile Home Community. Tommy joined me, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the kind of peaceful expression that comes from understanding difficult truths. Mom, can I ask you something personal? Always. Do you ever regret the choices you made? Living modestly while having resources to live differently? I watched children play in the common area between trailers, children whose families had food security because of programs we'd established, children who would have educational opportunities because of scholarships we'd funded. Tommy, I've learned that there are 2 kinds of wealth. There's wealth that makes you a target for people like Madison Sterling, and wealth that makes you powerful enough to protect yourself from them. Which kind do you have? I have the kind that lets me drink coffee on my front porch while knowing that people who try to manipulate me face real consequences for their choices. Tommy was quiet for several minutes, watching neighbors chat on their front steps. I used to think being powerful meant having enough money that nobody could hurt you. And now? Now I think being powerful means having enough resources to make sure people who try to hurt others face justice for it. Tommy Winchester, you've learned the difference between being wealthy and being wise. What's the difference? Wealthy people accumulate resources to protect themselves. Wise people use resources to ensure justice is served when protection fails. As stars appeared over our small community, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. 6 months ago, Madison Sterling had called me a fat pig and nearly destroyed everything I'd built. Tonight, she was living in another state with a destroyed career, while the charitable operations she'd tried to steal were stronger than ever. Mom, what's the hardest lesson you've learned about people? I smiled, recognizing the question that would build our community. The hardest lesson I've learned is that some people will always assume they can manipulate you based on how you look or where you live. But the most important lesson is that when those people reveal their true nature, you have the power to ensure they face consequences for their choices. Tommy nodded thoughtfully. What wisdom would you share with people who might be facing similar situations? Never underestimate the quiet ones. And remember, when someone shows you who they really are through their actions, believe them. Then make sure they face appropriate consequences for those actions. As we sat together on the porch of my modest double-wide trailer, coordinating charitable operations that served thousands of families across 3 states, I realized that sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving you were right. Sometimes the greatest victory is ensuring that people who prey on others learn exactly what that behavior costs them. Your inner wisdom matters. Trust it when it tells you someone is trying to manipulate or control you. And remember, real power isn't just protecting yourself from predators. Real power is making sure those predators face justice for their choices. What consequences have you seen for people who underestimate others?